Tony Williams is here. We are so pleased that he's been able to join us. We're very pleased that J. David Gowdy, president of the Washington Jefferson Madison Institute, is here. David, if you'd like to stand up and wave it back. And I want people to know that you are here. Tony really does not need an awful lot more introduction. I've talked to you about him and his work. Of course, I've been holding up the Jamestown experiment because this is my favorite. Actually, I was holding this up and somebody said, I read that. I said, oh my gosh, that's really good. America's Beginnings, The Cox and the Covenant, and of course, The Hurricane of Independence, which is my next read. And I couldn't help but going through and saying, oh my gosh, what's happening on the Outer Banks? And this is like, I spent so much time on the Outer Banks, I didn't quite relate it to the independence of the United States. But anyways, we've got some good reads here, and he's got some great stories to tell. So, Tony, thank you.
I will start by relating a little tale. By the way, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here. A little tale from when we met. I was signing books down at Colonial Williamsburg, and Professor Plaskett comes up to me, Jamestown experiment. He's very enthusiastic, right? I just gave this book to my son. He's like, I need another copy, and you're here. You're Tony Williams, right? And I, yes, I am. And so we talked for about 6 hours. No, I'm kidding. But we talked for a long time, and a great fellow. And his wife was there too, and we got to talking about Charlottesville, and I told him about the Institute, and he invited me to speak to all of you. And as a former history teacher, as some of you know, Hannah, don't try to hide back there, I taught Hannah. So whatever deficiencies in her education, which are very few, but you can blame them on me, right? So yes, I remember she was there my first year when I went to Peninsula Catholic in Newport News. Sophomore year, she just dived right into AP European, and then sadly we didn't get to teach her after that, but a great student, and I was so happy to see somebody I knew, and they're growing and going to college. It's just so exciting. So anyway, I hated history in high school. Hated it. And I'm sure none of you felt that way. Okay, so a couple of you are smiling. I hated it too. It was so poorly done. Okay, how poorly done was it? That's what you guys say. First of all, it was just bad because I only had to take 2 years of it, right? I mean, it was only like 2 credits, and it was just U.S. history, modern U.S. history, and early U.S. history, junior and senior year. And so you can blame, you know, we were sort of not even Eurocentric, because I didn't even learn any European history. We were American-centric, and I guess you could point out flaws in that. But what's even worse, I mean, I just didn't even study it for 2 years, and then when I studied it, it was a very narrow portion of history. And then on top of that, I didn't learn anything, right? My teacher was so awful, kind of like Hannah's experience with me. So, but I remember my junior year, I was taking early U.S. history, right? And this teacher, I think he was about 85 years old, and all he would do is come up and write some notes on the board. Or actually, I should say he copied some sentences from the textbook, and we would go in and copy them down. It was like an hour-long class. It took about 5 or 10 minutes to copy this stuff down, and even at the time, we're like, oh, this is kind of cool for a few weeks, but then as you're going through the whole year, you're sitting there just chatting for 50 minutes, and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. But even then, we had some inkling that we might have been being cheated out of our education. And this is the one thing I remember, and you'll have to sort of excuse me, but this is the only thing that I remember from this class. I mean, he literally taught us nothing. But the one day he actually spoke extemporaneously and try to teach us something, he's like, we should have taken those Indians and lined them up and went, and I was like, didn't we kind of do that? But like, that's all I remember from this class. It's like, I want my money back. I know it's a public school, but I want my money back. I want my property taxes back. And then senior year was not quite as bad. I mean, this teacher had tried a little bit, but we studied U.S. history from the Civil War to the present. You're like, you have a whole year, hour-long classes. How much could you do? We didn't get past World War II. I'm like, come on. What about Watergate? I've heard something about McCarthyism or Vietnam I was interested in learning about. I mean, back when I was growing up, I was kind of closer to Vietnam than you guys were and wanted to learn about it and all that. And we spent 3 or 4 months on World War II. We've learned it almost as long as they took to fight the war, okay? But I can't say I really learned anything because he would just kind of talk about a few things and say, are there any questions? So for 45 or 50 minutes, I would sit there and listen to these 2 or 3 nitwits who didn't understand anything. They would ask all these questions. Like, he just went over that. What don't you understand? And it's not like he really, I would have liked to have learned about World War II for 3 months, but he didn't really teach us anything for 3 months. It was so bad. I literally walked out of high school hating history. I had a latent interest in it. I had heard about some of these historical figures, even just in popular culture from watching TV and reading the newspaper and so forth, but just walked out of high school not learning anything about them. Well, so I went to college, I went to Syracuse University, and I majored in political science because I wanted to be a lawyer, right? Everybody wants to be a lawyer, especially back then. And I said, well, you should major in political science, right? And so I took a few classes and was interested in it, and then I took some history classes, and I loved it. And the professors were engaging, and they were interesting, and they brought it alive, and we were reading primary sources, and it was just great. And so I was just gobbling up every history course in sight. I was taking 4 or 5 a semester. You want to talk about a reading list, a stack of books. But I couldn't get enough of it. I just loved it. So I finished up my general education requirements and just took all the history. I will say this, one of the flaws in the way I approached things was that I took a lot of modern history. And the reason why I did that is, first of all, it's just very interesting, like World War I and II, and sort of Nazism, communism, and all these things, and modern U.S. history. And I found it very fascinating. And some of the leaders like Churchill and Stalin and all these guys, FDR, is very, very interesting. But then I sort of got into a rut of just taking these classes constantly. And I was foolish because I said, well, I'd really kind of like to take ancient history, and we had a great medieval history professor and all that, but I was kind of scared. I was like, well, I already know a lot about this, so I can get an A in those classes because I already know a lot about it. Duh, rather than saying, boy, you're here, why don't you get a broad education and learn about things you don't know? That's sort of the idea of taking classes and going to college, learning things you don't know. But I think I made a mistake doing that. I really should have just said, well, I'm relatively smart and I can go into a class and, you're learning what the professor's teaching you and you're reading the books and you can excel in anything, not just the stuff you already know. Why do that over and over again? But I went to Syracuse and got my history degree and picked up a wife along the way, met my wife, and I started applying to law schools. And I did a few of the applications and sent them off or whatever, and had always wanted to be a lawyer. And finally I got to this one application, I don't even know which college it was, but it said, why do you want to go to law school? And we've all been there with these essays, right? I mean, you guys just did that to get into UVA, right? I think there were a lot of freshmen. Or it's a bad memory if you're a sophomore or older, but it said, why do you want to go to law school? And I said, well, duh, I want to make a lot of money and be filthy rich and drive a Ferrari and have a huge house and just light my cigars with $100 bills, right? Duh, that's why everybody goes to law school, right? But you can't write that on the application, right? And I guess today you can go to professional essay writers for your application and all that, and your parents can spend $800. I'm sure nobody in here did that. But there's a real art to doing it now, and there's all sorts of stuff on the internet I'm sure you can find and all that. And I could have given them the answer they wanted to hear, right? But that application sat on my desk for 2 months, and I didn't fill it out. And I got into the sort of existential personal crisis about who I was. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, I can't answer this question. I can't answer it honestly. Right? I can answer it, but I can't answer it honestly. And I started to think about my goals and what I wanted to do with my life. And you know, being a lawyer is fine, and that's great. It's a noble profession and all that. Don't let the jokes, you know, dissuade you. You know, it is an honorable profession. But I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And I started thinking about, do I really want to spend the next 40-odd years of my working life just for the pure and greed of it? And I just started to think, and I said, you know, I don't really like the law. I had interned and worked in a law firm. I didn't really like working for the law firm, but I wanted to be filthy, stinking rich, right? And finally, I never sent in that application, and I just stopped applying to law school. I said, you know, that's a really stupid thing to base your life on. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with making money and being successful and having nice things. That's fine and good. That's great. But if I'm basing my whole career choices on that, I just thought, you know, maybe that's not a very good thing. So, but I thought, I love history, right? Why not go to graduate school for history? And my wife tells me now, she didn't tell me at the time, you know, because, you know, we were, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend and, you know, at a certain stage, you know, talking about getting married and all that. And I'm not saying she was greedy or liked me for my future plans, but now she tells me, she's like, oh yeah, I was going through my own existential crisis about that one. You know, I thought you were going to be a lawyer and you want to be like a history professor or history teacher. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll support you no matter what. Yeah. Sure, okay. So I applied to graduate school and got in, and I could genuinely fill out those applications, that I love history, and I did well in college in history, and I wanted to be a history professor. So I went to graduate school, went to Ohio State, and did fine and all that, and I got to a certain point where they taught, when you get to graduate school, they talk a lot about job prospects, right? It was like half your time there, you're either like thinking about your dissertation topic or like your job prospects at the end. And it was dismal. And it was dismal. And quite frankly, you know, there was a lot of affirmative action going on, and maybe still is. And as a white male, I thought, well, my job prospects might be even less. And that's just a fact. And so, you know, and they were really dissuading people. It's like, oh, I don't know, and they stopped letting as many students into the graduate programs because they're producing hundreds and hundreds of PhDs every year, and there were like 6 jobs or something. You know, I'm exaggerating, but I mean, it was that bad. I mean, you're talking about 200 applications for like one community college job, in which you're going up against guys with like Harvard PhDs with like 4 books under their belt, but they're teaching as an adjunct professor at like 4 different colleges, part-time, picking up like $1,500 a class with no health benefits and trying to support a young family. And I thought, well, you know, I don't know that that's really, you know, for me, or, you know, you end up as, you know, I had sort of high aspirations. If I'm going to be a professor, I want to be a big name college and all that, but, you know, you sort of ended up at a lot of backwaters and trying desperately and moving around 5 times to get that tenure track position. I mean, it was pretty tough. And so the prospects weren't, but I said, you know, the other thing I said is, honestly, I love the history. I love the reading about it. I love talking about it with others. I just didn't really like the research part of it. It's just a little solitary. And that's kind of important for a dissertation and for a professor and your scholarly articles and all that. I mean, you have to really enjoy research. And I said, I don't want to do the research. I don't want to go on sabbatical. I want to be in the classroom. I love history. I want to be talking about it with students, with young people. And so the long and short of it is I stopped with my master's degree.